Hi guys, welcome to lesson 2. As promised, English literature for UPSC mains optional. This is going to be W.H. Auden's lesson. As you can see on the screen, this is Mr. W.H. Auden, and let's try to start the presentation lesson. Okay, this is going to be three. This particular lesson is going to be 10 minutes, roughly 10 minutes, and I'm going to try to wrap up the whole lesson on Odin in three lessons. So this is part one of three. Okay, um, so what are we trying to do here with the options here? The first thing is W.H. Auden is one of the most important poets of the syllabus. He's part of paper two, uh, poetry and drama section, which is section A of the paper. We got 10 poems of W.H. Auden, so there is a lot of ground to cover, and you can very well expect 20 to 30 marks worth of questions from Auden. And he's not as difficult or complex as T.S. Eliot or probably W.B. Yeats or other poets in paper one. So, without further ado, let's start to understand what Mr. Auden talked about. What was his poetry's aim and ideologies are. So here we go. Winston Hugh Auden, he was born in northeast of England, city, a town called York. Um, it's it's in the northeast of England, and it's not entirely an industrial town. It's a coastal town, and it's a walled city. Uh, and he was born to pretty good professional middle class family. His father was a medical officer and his mother was a nurse. So in terms of his initial training and outlook and the attitude that he inherited from his parents, he combined both the rationality and the scientific side from his father's side and the religious side from his mother. His mother was a devout Anglican Catholic. So he was a combination of the two seemingly disparate qualities, and he always confessed to that. He went to Oxford University and he did very well there. And that poet of the 30s group that was formed there, and that were his formative years. Soon after Oxford, he went to Berlin, so that was his international experience and his understanding of the formative years of Nazism, and he saw that closely, and that we can see in some of his poems. His first publication came out in 1930, titled Poems. We have a few poems in the syllabus from that particular collection. Okay, let's quickly look at the list of poems in the syllabus as per the UPSC syllabus, current UPSC syllabus. And so these are the poems. So the first one, Petition and Consider. They are from that 1930s collection titled Poems. Then we have Partition, which is about the partition of India, and it's a comment on the guy who drew the partition line, the line of partition, Cyril Radcliffe. It's quite an important poem considering the Indian context. Then September 1, 1939. Yes, so this is the poem. You can guess this is the poem written just before the Second World War. Then we have this Musée de Beaux-Arts. Pardon my French. This was also written in 1938. It's quite an interesting poem. Uses mythology. Then Manda Set Enfant. Consider, again 1930s poem, one of his first collection. Unknown Citizen, 1939. Lay Your Sleeping Head, which is a lullaby, 1937. It's a love lyric. And In Memory of W.B. Yeats, which is obviously, as the title suggests, it's written in the honor of W.B. Yeats, who expired. After his death, he wrote this poem. And The Shield of Achilles, one of his later poems. So we only have two of his later poems, Partition and Shield of Achilles. So the later years of any poet are his years where he's matured and he's figured out, worked out his ideology and his sources and his mythology and his symbols and motifs. So Shield of Achilles is quite a mature and interesting poem, and it is one of the two poems in the syllabus along with the Musée de Beaux-Arts, where Auden draws heavily upon the mythology of the time, mythology, mythical past. So this is an interesting poem in that regard. Okay, so let's talk a bit about, before moving any further, about what needs to be done and all that. Let's talk a bit about how to approach poetry for the exam. And we're talking specifically about the UPSC exam, but this information or knowledge can be applied to anything, because a lot of students are quite comfortable with prose, reading prose, but when it comes to poetry, and especially poetry, which is not in your mother tongue one, and which is not about the topics and subjects and themes that you are familiar with. So students reading W.H. Auden in India almost 100 years down the line will definitely struggle to understand what he's talking about, right? So we definitely need a way in to understand, and this applies to all the poems, all the poets in the syllabus, or even the prose. So when I teach students, I always talk a lot about the background and try to place the poems within the context of the times and the era the poet or the author was living in or grew up in. So let's look at a few points. Which these are strictly my understanding of how you should approach poetry, specifically for the exams. And so there is a difference between approaching poetry for the exam from the exam point of view or for your own pleasure reading. So when you're doing pleasure reading, that's a different game altogether. So we're not talking about that. So we're strictly talking about how to crack poetry so that you can talk and assess and analyze and talk right about it in the exam. And your opinion needs to be original opinion as far as possible. So here is a quick list. The first thing to do is to read the background info of the poet and the socio-politics of the time. It's highly uh, important that you understand a bit more about the poet, right? So you read quickly. You don't have to research on his life, but read quickly and understand. Try to understand what his sources are and socio-politics of the time. For example, W.H. Auden was writing during the Second World War, and he grew up during the First World War. So he actually saw both the wars. So those are his materials, and those are the socio-politics of his time. So that will help you understand a lot. Then the next step is you read original poems without any summary notes. So try to read the poems in the light of whatever socio-political contextual background that you try to understood. And this, so then the third is read original poems, then you consult about the sources of the author and take help on external allusions. So there will be poets where you simply original reading simply won't cut it. There will be a lot of external references and allusions that the poet uses that you need help about, right? So that's where the mythical past, Auden uses a lot of Greek mythology, for example, in Shield of Achilles. So you need to understand that mythology so that you can quickly consult and find out what the sources are. So once you understand the sociopolitic, you've done one original reading, then you got back again to do some more homework about the sources of the poet and allusions and references, his mythology and in his system of symbols. Then you read the poem again, and it will make more sense, right? So this is how you approach the poetry of this of any poet. So the next lesson will be about this poet of the 30s, where Auden belonged. Most of his poetry is from the 30s. We'll talk about his poetic influences, and then we'll talk about a couple of poems where he uses the mythical past, and we'll talk about those mythologies. Okay, so this lecture is quite an introductory lesson on how to approach poetry and what the syllabus entails for W.H. Auden. Thanks for watching, and bye bye.